just saying, like name, like nature. I often get asked if Drinkwater is my real name or if I just use it for environmentally related conferences. It is, in fact, a real name. So extremely grateful to be here today. We did a piece of work recently where we asked some of the real founders of the green building movement, how do we set out a vision? What's at the core of sustainability in the built environment? And one of my favorite little pieces of wisdom, and it's really stayed with me ever since, is that sustainability is a byproduct of relationships developed deeply over time. And I rather like that. It's certainly why we're here today, and thank you to our hosts for encouraging us to develop these cross-sectoral relationships. And it's really certainly what we're all about at the World GBC. Very briefly, for those of you who don't know us, we're a global coalition, 100 national green building councils, the Sweden GBC, our member over here, coalition of 27,000 member companies, really with a single mission and vision, driving sustainability in the built environment. And the philosophy is exactly what we're here to do today. It's bringing people together into one common conversation across an incredibly complex and fragmented value chain. And why is it important to do that? Because there are huge business benefits, as well as climate and other benefits, to be had by producing better buildings. And that's really what we're here talking about, is better buildings. And I think it's interesting that the language that we've tended to employ around our sector is that there's a huge amount of fragmentation. There are a huge number of barriers. We call these things split incentives. That a landlord and a tenant relationship means that a landlord might improve energy efficiency, but the tenant takes the benefit, so why move? That if you're developing a property, well, maybe the owner eventually will be the one who reaps the life cycle benefits, so why move? But I think we really should be talking here about split benefits. We know that the benefits of sustainable building are many, and they accrue across the entire life cycle. They accrue to many different stakeholders at many different stages of the property life cycle. And there is a huge benefit to be had, but it's currently split into little pieces. Working together, we're able to access a much bigger collective benefit. So that's why that's really, really key. I want to introduce very briefly some work. This was really led by the UN's Environmental Programme and Skanska, who we'll be hearing from in a moment, but supported by a number of us. I know Roland was also involved in this. And this was work around greening the supply chain. This was really the background report to a program that's been launched by the UN's Environmental Programme called the 10-Year Framework Programme on Sustainable Consumption and Production for our sector. It is exactly what it sounds like, a 10-year framework program across the globe to scale up the frameworks needed to implement sustainable consumption and production patterns. And the report looked at those various different stages of the property life cycle, the many different stakeholders involved in those different stages, the barriers, and then ultimately the sort of green initiatives that could be taken. What businesses, policymakers, and others could actually be doing to help green that property life cycle, to help green the supply chain ultimately. And some of the key tools for business that were highlighted, I want to talk about 3 of them principally at the building level, because I know my colleague from WBCSD is going to be talking very much to the product level, and our colleague from Skanska at the corporate level. But at the building level, some of the really key tools I want to just go through very briefly. Green building rating tools have been very important in driving the market. Life cycle assessment and costing, becoming more widely used. But Josefina's work, I think, speaks to where we need to go next as a sector with that. And building information modeling. Call it green BIM, but building information modeling in general. Now, green building rating tools, that's something that's very core to the heart of GBCs, because when Green Building Council started, they very much said in all of their countries around the world, we don't have a common language. It's hard to set targets. It's hard to speak to one another. Manufacturers, to the designers, to the investors, developers, and all those many parts that make up our industry. And so rating tools were really created to, at a national level in many instances, create a bit of a common language. Help people target set. Make clear the lines of communication and the aims so products could fulfill some of the criteria needed for building level to get the points you need for a BREEAM Excellent or a LEED Platinum or Amelia Bignad building. And they have really helped transform the market in many countries across the world by bringing people into that common conversation. But as Josefina said, we are a huge sector, and they have driven a small part of it, is the truth. They're quite complex. They try to take a holistic view on sustainability, and they are, I think, delivering in a fairly comprehensive fashion sustainability in many building projects across the world. But the problem is that they focus on market leaders, and that's great. But what about the rest of the market? What about that long supply chain that struggles to really understand a complex tool that has 40 or 50 components of it? Sustainability is complex if you really want to do sustainability. But how do you get started on that journey as a business? We know, in terms of green building rating tools, that to deliver, say, a LEED Platinum or a BREEAM Outstanding building, there is a cost premium associated with doing that. But the interesting thing about this, because this is requiring people to think beyond where building regulation takes us, beyond what we're told is this is what you must do, to really this is what we can do, to the realm of possibility. And there has historically been an associated cost uptick with that. This is some research into the typical premiums associated with different levels of green building. Between 0 and 10% is the usual sort of cost premium associated. But what we see very clearly across a number of markets is that if you introduce one of these certifications, okay, it costs a little bit more for design and construction teams to deliver it in the first instance, but those costs reduce over time. As people start to coalesce around that common language, as people start to understand it and the supply chain really matures. So the costs are driving down all the time. Life cycle assessment, the second of these tools I wanted to mention, incredibly important. Life cycle costing, important because we know that that small uptake in the cost of construction is significantly offset over time in the benefits that we reap in other ways. So cost savings in terms of maintenance and operation, energy, water-related costs, and others. Lifecycle costing, a critical tool, I think, for businesses to make the business case of why we should be building greener buildings. And lifecycle assessment, that's a difficult one to crack, to really look back through at the embodied impacts, particularly within our sector, within our buildings. And I just wanted to say, Josefina's work, the work that the European Commission are progressing, we see as absolutely critical to have this simple, common green language. Not just because we believe ultimately that there is a lot to be learned between countries, a huge amount of leadership shown, but always different and interesting solutions in other cultures. So it helps us speak across borders, but ultimately it will help us speak across the supply chain. It will be absolutely key, to some extent, to simplifying the complexity of life cycle assessment. And I wanted to end a little bit with building information modeling. Now, this is a tool that many are using. Some governments in Europe and other countries are moving forward with building information modeling requirements in large public construction projects now. Building information modeling, I think, is one of those examples of the power of IT to transform sectors, to provide a single information gateway, a single set of data about the functional and performance characteristics of construction projects. It helps teams align around a single model. It helps the flow of data critically between different actors involved in the delivery of green buildings. And we're starting to really see that where BIM is being used in construction projects, it's achieving really quite exciting efficiencies. I'm not going to read out all the numbers there, but I think one area for sustainability where this will be really, really key is trying to close the gap in terms of the operation of buildings. We design buildings with an intended performance, and in operation, often, they perform quite differently. BIM's helping us start to explore what are some of the reasons for that, to really get aligned around the data involved in building projects, and to look towards their operation over time. So just a kind of snapshot at the building level of 3 areas that I think are really, really critical. Life cycle assessment, and particularly the work now that the EU is leading on, I think an absolutely critical piece of work for the building community to come together on. And I'll end there, pass over to my colleagues who'll talk about the other parts I didn't cover. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James.